But I am talking today. I'm gonna do something I don't do in most episodes, is introduce the person that I'm talking to.
Awesome.
So I'm talking to Paul Little, who is a professional comic book colorist. Is that a accurate description?
That's 90% of what I do, so it's
Mm-hmm.
pretty accurate. Yeah.
Cool.
Although
Yeah.
I like to put professional in scare quotes because I don't know, I still feel like I have imposter syndrome after 13 or 14 years of doing this.
Yeah.
But um,
I
yeah,
think
I don't know.
I think imposter syndrome is something that like I kind of hate it because it's such a buzzword and it's just like everybody just throws it around, but like it is a real thing and I think everybody kind of feels it. I saw just yesterday I saw Evan Dorkin post something on Twitter about it was doing one of those Twitter things where it's like pick four pictures of things you've worked on, and for him it was like Space Ghost Coast to Coast, the Superman animated series, Yo Gabba Gabba, and he's like, yeah, I had imposter syndrome while I was doing this, and I'm like, what? You're Evan Dorkin.
I know. Yeah, he's such an underground legend, and
Yeah.
you look at the list of accomplishments that guy has under his belt too, and he's done a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Like I watched. Do you watch Noah Van Sciver's YouTube channel? It's really really good.
I have
It's
been meaning to. I
he
follow him
gets
on Facebook, so I see like I like to see all his art and whatever he posts, but I haven't watched any of his videos.
it's kind of a shame. I wish he would get that cartoonist kayfabe bump
Mm-hmm.
because those guys have really exploded during the pandemic, and I think Noah kind of deserves it. He's got such a great, I don't know, it's a good process video series that he does, but he's also interviewing people like Mimi Pond. I don't know if you know her. She's been an underground cartoonist for many, many
Yeah,
years. She
yeah.
actually wrote the first episode of The Simpsons with Santa's Little Helper, where they get him from the racetrack
Oh wow.
because she knew Matt Groening, I guess, back when they were both doing like little weeklies, like alternative weeklies for like The Stranger or whatever it was that they were working for at the time. So when The Simpsons was greenlit, I think he went around Groening and asked, I don't know, a good dozen of his contemporaries, like, do you guys want to write, a script for this show that Fox picked up? And everyone said yes, not knowing what it would one day become.
Right.
But yeah, I can't recommend Van Sciver's channel enough, and he talks quite a bit about imposter syndrome, I guess. It seems to me like he still can't quite believe that he's being published by Fantagraphics after all these years. And he's been around for what, 15 years or something at this point. But I think it's natural. I think there's no hard and fast set of rules when it comes to creative work too. So it's one of those things where I think everyone's path is a little bit different, and we all find our own weird way into the game. And it feels like we've earned our way. It just feels like a bunch of random occurrences that led us to wherever we are.
Right. That's the weird thing with the way the comic book industry is it's an industry, like it is an industry, but it's also so small relative to other industries. It's so, like you said, there's so many ways for people to just carve out a niche without having to even essentially like actually be in the industry, but they can still be a huge professional and make their living doing what they're doing. You know what I mean? Like it's such a weird group of creatives.
It's a strange way to make money too, because it's there's no hard and fast payment system. Like you're not getting a paycheck every 2 weeks or every Friday or whatever. It's and again, guys like Van Sciver, I mean, if you're actually working on your own books, I think it's a little bit easier because you can sort of keep an eye on how much they're selling or not selling, as the case may be. But like with me, I'm just kind of a freelance jobber for hire, and it's one project to the next for me. So I don't really have any proprietary interest in anything that I do. It's just trying to find people that I work well with who think that I complement what they do well, and just trying to stick with that as long as I possibly can. So
I one of the earliest comic book conventions I went to, they had it wasn't really a panel, it was more like a I don't know what you would call it, like almost like a mentor session where they tried to the person putting on the con tried to offer this service where you could, I think it was like $20, and you would basically get an hour to just sit with the pros that were there and just have like a chat session of just like they'll impart to you all their wisdom, you know. And I was sitting, I remember at that convention, I was tabling at that convention, and I was across the aisle from Fabian Nicieza, who you know, X-Men writer in the 90s, and it famously co-created Deadpool, depending on who you ask. Don't ask Rob Liefeld. Yeah, but and so like Nicieza was there, Scott Lobdell was there, Joshua Dysart, writer. I'm specifically, this was like for a writer's thing, because there were artists there too, but this was like comic book writers. And so I was like, okay, well, I want to do that. And Phil Hester was there too. And I specifically remember like going into it, and Fabian and Joshua Dysart, Fabian Nicieza were talking to each other. And I think it was Joshua Dysart said, I definitely do not have $20 worth of advice to give anybody. like that's like verbatim what he said. And I think the only thing I got out of it, I mean, it was just nice to chat with them. Like, it's always, I think it's always good to talk to people and just kind of try to gain whatever you can from their insight and their experience, you know. But Phil Hester, actually, he's the one who just said, he was like, there's no real like clear path to being a professional in comics, and your best bet, the only way to like be successful both creatively and professionally, is to just find a creative partner, somebody that you can trust, somebody that you work well with, and just keep making comics. You know, you just got to keep doing it. Yeah. And then it's sort of like, and then success will sort of come mysteriously after that. It's that South Park Underpants Gnomes thing, you know, step 3 blank, step 4 profit, you know. It's make a comics and somehow you will make money. And like you said, it's different for everybody. Everybody has their own path that they take.
And sometimes you'll make money and sometimes you'll lose money.
Yeah.
Because you know, there are no guarantees, and there are certain projects that are just doomed, I think, from the start. But,
yeah. Well, as a comic book writer who produces all of his own books, I do nothing but lose money making comic books.
Yeah, for sure. It's the kind of a loss leader until you sell that first screenplay, and then maybe if lightning strikes, then you'll finally make some money off of it.
That's how you have to think about it. You
know, I feel like I tricked my way into the industry at a really opportune moment. My first published work was back in 2007. Actually, that's not true. My first published work was, I don't know if you'll remember Lowkey Comics, because I don't know how far back your association with Jason Green goes. I know you and I both.
That's why I know it. I'm not really familiar with it, but I know I've heard it referenced
a bunch of this is another weird thing too. I'm actually trying to think of like how far back our mutual association goes. Like I remember you from social media, and obviously we did Heroes with Chris probably 6-7 years ago, maybe longer than that now.
No, you did you colored the Heroes annual number 4, which was in 2017, so about 4 years.
It seems way longer than that for some reason.
For me, it feels like 2017 was just like 2 years ago, not like I'm like, my whole sense of time has been completely destroyed. No, for sure. Last year and a half. Yeah, exactly.
But no, so Lowkey Comics was something that Jason decided that he would kind of adopt the mantle of publisher for that. It was a bunch of us who were letter hacks, basically, from the old Savage Forum, dedicated to Savage Dragon. I think everybody watching this will know that book.
Yeah.
And there were plenty of us who wrote and drew comics. And at the time, I was drawing more than I was coloring for other people. In fact, at that time, I don't think I had ever actually colored a single piece of art for anybody other than me. But we ended up doing, what was it? Lowkey Comics Presents #1, I think, was the first thing that we did, which was an anthology that had work in it by Kyle Morton, who went on to do a graphic novel for IDW that was written by Scott Thompson from Kids in the Hall.
Oh, I know that graphic novel because I remember looking that up specifically because of the Kids in the Hall connection.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Kids in the Hall. So.
Oh, me too. It's up here. It's a
I mean, it's Canadian. Yeah, they're Canadian royalty, I assume.
That and SCTV, which I've actually never been a big fan of, but you know, I respect SCTV, and I certainly, you know. I appreciate the place it has in the annals of comedy, but it's never been my bag. So yeah, Lowkey Comics would have been the first time, that anthology, that I ever had anything in print. And from there, I think I was posting art on the Shadowline forum on the image boards back when they had a discussion board. I think it was shut down maybe 3-4 years back. And I just got an email out of the blue from Jim Valentino saying that we're looking for a colorist to fill in on one of our titles called Bomb Queen. And at the time, I had not heard of it. I didn't know who Jimmy Robinson was, who's the writer, artist, and creator of that book.
Yeah. I was buying that book on the stands when it was coming out.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I was kind of hesitant to take it on initially. One of the biggest, the rudest awakening, I think, for me entering the comics field was finding out just how little money there was to be had in comics.
My God, I know.
I mean, it would be pretty impolitic of me, I think, to say out loud the page rate that I got for that book, but it was so much lower than I was expecting that it was just absurd. And I'm like, man, I was working part-time at that time, just doing scut work in an office, and I hated it. And I was looking for any outlet for creativity. So I'm like, you know what, I'll give it a shot anyway. Like, you know, it's not going to make me rich, but at the very least, it'll get my name out there, and it'll be, you know, an opportunity to do something that a lot of people sort of reach for and never actually succeed in doing.
Oh yeah.
Getting some sort of creative work published by a publisher like Image.
Having a credit in an Image book in any capacity is a feather in your cap.
And you know, the first time you see the work, I mean, it's that weird. You probably get this as a writer too. I think everybody does. They look at their contribution to the finished product and they're like, man, all I see are the mistakes. But at the same time, it's still so cool to see the work out there and like in print with your name attached to it, and knowing that however many, you know, thousands of people are looking at it and thinking this is great, and you know, I'm actually going to throw some dollars at this when I don't have to. And it's just it's such a, you know, feeling of I don't know, just community, I guess, which is weird. Like you said, comics is such a small industry that, like, you know, it sometimes feels as if you could practically meet and shake the hands of everybody who has ever paid money for your work. You know, the audience is so at the end of the day that, like, you know, sometimes when I'm, you know, if I'm at a concert and I'm in a hall that holds 2,000 people, I'll look around and think to myself, you know, this is about the number of people who have bought book X that I worked on. And it's humbling, and it's, I don't know, it's just strange to realize, like, for me, there's a constant tension between realizing just how small the audience is and understanding that there's an audience at all.
Yeah.
So the imposter syndrome warring with the ambition, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've talked about before with other creatives. I do think that that's just a common thing among creative people, that tug of war. I can't think of exactly how I had a good phrasing for it once, and I can't think of what it is now, but it's that like that arrogance that, you know, you can do it, but then also, you know, you're your own worst critic, and so anytime you look at what you do, you know it's not good enough. And so there's that constant, like, I know I'm good enough, but what I'm actually doing is not good enough. So it's a weird space. It's a weird headspace to be in.
It is, for sure. But you know what? And you're right when you say it's kind of a tug of war, because I think, you know, ultimately you're getting pulled to do better work. And I think that's what it's all about. It's just, it's knowing that, you know, what you've done is good enough, but you could still do so much better. And there's so much more room for improvement that you can, you know,
I think that's
into the next project.
That's the positive way to deal with that feeling. It's just always be improving.
I think most people do. Yeah. And, you know, most people do show improve over time. It's one of those things where, you know, sometimes, I mean, I push out so many pages in a year as a colorist that, like, it's kind of absurd. Like, I push out 500 minimum. Sometimes, you know, there have been years like 2013 to 2015, I think I averaged 3 pages a day. So probably around 1,000 pages during those years, which is a shitload of work. Like, it's an unbelievable amount of work. And sometimes it seems like the wheels are moving very slowly and you're not really improving as much as you'd like to. But, you know, other times you can look at the work that you did at the beginning of a given year and then the work that you did at the end of it. And you're like, you know what, this is actually a damn sight better than it was when I, you know, started down this.
Yeah. Do you find yourself like what kind of books do you work on normally? Is it a lot of creator-owned stuff? Do you do? I mean, I know, like, the industry is most everything is. If you're not at Marvel or DC or Dark Horse, it's pretty much creator-owned in some capacity. Or I guess Dynamite and Boom, you know. But there's tiered, it's a tiered work system. Has there, I'm sorry, has there been any like what have you worked on any book like a extended run, or do you kind of just do a lot of smaller projects here and there?
These days, it's a lot more small projects.
Okay.
I'm working on a book for Scout Comics right now.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And that's a 10-issue series.
I'm sorry, what was the name of it again?
Oh, North Bend.
Oh, okay.
It takes place in Oregon, and it's kind of an MK Ultra themed sort of like government conspiracy, socio-political kind of book.
Okay.
It's a lot of fun. I wish it would be like I wish it were more than 10 issues, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
All right.
It's one of those things where I feel like I'm settling into a nice, comfortable groove where the work is becoming more and more easy, and it's also stronger and stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And just as we're hitting our stride, it's like, oh well, the book is over in one more issue.
Oh no, so, yeah.
But the longest run I think I've ever done was Pocket God, which was a licensed comic based on a cell phone game that came out back in, I want to say 2010 to 2013, in that range. I think I did 19, 20 issues for that. That was for Ape Entertainment. They were around for a minute. They weren't around for very long, and they mostly did licensed comics. They had the Shrek license for a while, and I did a little Shrek short story for them.
Oh, neat.
That was written by Scott Shaw, which was really weird because like I've known his name for many, many years, and it's just one of those strange, like, oh, I never thought I would ever work with this guy in a million years. So Pocket God was like 19, 20 issues, give or take. Morning Glories for Image, I did 26 issues, I think.
Oh, okay. That's a good run on Morning Glories.
Yeah. And that book was interesting too, because when I came aboard, I kind of had carte blanche. So that book was created by Nick Spencer, who is Mr. Marvel now.
Yeah.
I think he's doing Spider-Man like twice a month, maybe 4 times a month. I don't even really know what the schedule of that book is, to be honest. And the artist is Joe Eisma. And Joe and I went way back. We did something for Love. I think it was called Viper Comics in like 2007 or 8 when I first started really jobbing for different artists. And he asked me initially if I wanted to color the pitch for Morning Glories, but I was a little too busy at the time and the schedules just weren't working out. So I passed. And then, of course, the book ended up getting picked up. It was nominated for an Eisner for, I think, Best New Series. And then Nick was nominated for Best Writer that first year. And I just kept thinking to myself, shit, I know how to pick them. But eventually, Alex Salazzo, the colorist who ended up taking the book, had to step aside after the first 2 years. And Joe came to me and said, hey, we're looking for somebody that can fill on, for a few issues on Morning Glories. And I said, you know what? Sure, I'll do it. And, it was fun. I basically trained myself to sort of reverse engineer Alex's style. I wanted it to look as close to what he was doing as possible. And he has a very painterly touch that isn't really similar to what I do normally. So that was a bit of a challenge, but it was also a lot of fun to do under a really grueling deadline at first. I think the first issue I did for them was a double-sized issue, and I had to crank it out in 5 days.
Ooh.
I remember being incredibly sleepless by the end of it, and I was on like page 25, and I was my eyes were crossing, and I was ready to cry and just like collapse in a puddle of just tears and vomit and sleep for a week. But yeah, I don't know. That book was a lot of fun. And again, I think that might be my longest run. There have been little short fill-in ones here and there too. I've done so many small jobs for like small publishers. Like last year, I did a book called Dragonfly and Dragonfly Man for Ahoy Comics out of Syracuse. They're not very big, but they're pretty interesting. They do a lot of actually books that aren't too dissimilar to what you're doing with like Zero Zeros. Sort of not like slapstick comedy, but like lighthearted superhero-y type fare. And Dragonfly and Dragonfly Man basically takes place in 2 separate but parallel Earths, Earth Alpha and Earth Omega, where in Earth Alpha, there's Dragonfly Man, who is sort of a hokey Adam West style Batman. And then Earth Omega is sort of the Chris Nolan, modern, dark, gloomy, grim and gritty take on the hero. And then they basically have the same adventures parallel to one another.
That's an interesting like high concept for a story. I like that.
that was created by Tom Pyre is the writer. I think he was doing a lot of DC stuff.
Okay, I was gonna say I know that name.
Yeah, they're pretty interesting, Ahoy. Most of their books are written by gosh, what's the guy's name? I want to say Mark Russell. Does that sound like an actual comic book writer that I might?
That's somebody that I probably might be mixing it up with another name, but I recognize that name from like the digital webbing days.
Yeah, and he's best known, I think, for Second Son, which is sort of a lighthearted superheroic take on like Jesus coming back.
Yeah, okay.
And that's an Ahoy book. So those guys more or less write, I think, 90% of their line, and it's their output isn't huge. I think they do maybe 3 or 4 books a month in a given month. But it's quality stuff. And
cool.
I was actually kind of hoping that would lead to more work with them because they were really, really easy to work with.
Yeah.
And Krause that I got to color, and I loved his work on Irredeemable, the Boom Studios book with Mark Waid.
Yeah, I remember that one.
So it was solid stuff. But yeah, a lot of short runs like that. Joe Books, I did 4-ish Darkwing Duck when they had the Disney license. Actually, they shared it time with Dark Horse, IDW, Joe, and I think there was a 4th publisher as well for some reason that had the Disney Comics license. It's weird. Yeah, working on licensed stuff like that is a pretty big trip as well. Just because you're getting a lot of notes, you're getting a lot of I remember when I did the Shrek stuff for Ape Entertainment years ago, I would get notes back from actual DreamWorks licensor like artists whose job was basically to make sure that everything was on spec and like
on model and such. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that actually. I imagine working on the licensed products or projects, you're going to get more notes in general because there's more editorial tiers involved in making sure the final product looks the way it needs to look. But like as a colorist, like when you're working, who are you normally communicating with? Like, do you do books where you don't even talk to the artist on the book and you're just talking with an editor?
More often than you would think, probably. Yeah,
that was kind of my thought.
Like right now I'm working on this crazy graphic novel that is probably going to run to thousands of pages. Like there's a lot of work that's already been done. I think I want to say 600 pages had been drawn when I was brought in with 2 other colorists to tackle the book. And I don't think I could even name the artists who are on that book. I don't even know who they are or where they came from. It's the writer creator that I'm dealing with exclusively. It's very this is going to sound like I'm shit talking writers at this point, but sometimes I think writers sure. I think writers sometimes let the details get in the way of the art in ways that are fussy for all the wrong reasons. I mean, like there are certain, as an example of what I mean, I guess, if I get a page and it looks like it's a nighttime scene and it takes place outdoors, if I color it like it's nighttime and it's a deep blue sky filled with stars, but it's actually dawn, and that makes sense that I'll have to go back and change it because obviously that's a big storytelling that has to make it to the art. But there are other times too when I've worked with writers who just, I don't know, it almost feels like they think they're the director of a movie. And I think a lot of these writers who get involved in comics, maybe for, I don't want to say the wrong reasons.
I know exactly what you're referring to, though. There is
a certain subculture of person, I think, who sees comics and graphic novels as kind of a stepping stone to Hollywood,
a gateway into like the film industry. Yeah,
and that's fine. That's a legitimate reason to want to make a comic and to tell a story. I think maybe they're a little less dialed into the intricacies of the art form than writers who have just been reading comics for the sake of reading comics for years and years. So I've every once in a while I'll get strange notes like this character's clothes need to be red, and it just seems completely arbitrary. It's like I don't understand why they would need to be red, and it's I chose purple, and it's kind of a load-bearing color for this color scheme.
That's something that I kind of learned early on, like writing scripts. Is I always wonder, because I try to read scripts whenever I can from like professionals, and back in my digital webbing days where I was kind of like participating in the like the camaraderie of like, let's all read each other's scripts and give each other pointers and stuff, you know, and you see a lot of the early type of mistakes that people will make. And I think a lot of writers have that problem where they're really stuck in trying to like maintain the mystery or the suspense of the story in the script. And that's not the purpose of the script. The script is to explain to the artist exactly what's going on, you know.
It needs to be implicit. Yeah. I mean, it's funny too. Like I used to be involved in quite a few pitches when I first got started. Like when you get a foot in the door, you obviously want to find other people who are struggling to kind of get their name out there too.
Yeah.
There was a time when I probably did 2 or 3 pitches a month, pretty regularly for the first few years. And the one mistake that I would see over and over again was, you know, a writer trying to be coy in the pitch.
Yes, like, yeah, exactly.
The publisher or the editor are not the audience. Like you're not there to string them along for like 6 years while you tell the story. They have to know exactly what it is and what the purpose of the story is, and what the themes are, how things are going to unfold. And it can be frustrating to see that. And it's always nice when a writer understands that, like, no, that's not what we're doing. We're actually here to just spill everything out in as much detail as possible so that we can get this thing off the ground and actually find the audience that you can be coy with and tease along for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. I've always found that just fascinating, like people that try to get into comic book writing, and there is that, I don't know, I guess it's just a novice thing of just, there's a thing with writers is like you want to be perceived as being clever, you know. It's like you want to always like have people like in the palm of your hand waiting to hear what you're going to say next. And it's like, that's not the purpose of the script. You're describing to the artists like how to create that sensation for the readers, but the artists are not your readers. The artists are your co-creators.
Exactly. Yeah. They have to know exactly, in as much as a person can know what's going on inside a writer's head, I think the artist needs to know what's going on inside their
absolutely. So one thing in my own experience of making comics is the art of coloring is almost completely lost on me. Like I hear terms like color theory and color palette, and I don't know nothing about it. And I try to leave that up to the artists as much as possible. Like I'm working on a very small scale, self-published, self-produced books. So I'm most times I'm not even working with an editor. It's just me and an artist. So I usually leave most of the coloring decisions up to the artists themselves. So one of the questions I had for you, and this is totally not a loaded question, but is the colorist on a comic book the bass player of the comic book creating team?
Kind of. I was actually really, really worried for a second if you were going to ask that. Like, it's almost a trite question now. Who has a bigger impact on the finished art, the inker or the colorist?
I've
seen that question so many times in the last like 10 years. Increasingly, I actually think the answer is the colorist, and I'm not.
I think it's the colorist, hands down.
It's just it's funny, you know. I do watch a lot of interviews with cartoonists on YouTube and Vimeo and all these different places, and a lot of the older guys, like Steve Rude, for example, the more foundationally strong the artist is, I think the more common it is to hear this, but they really, really resent how overpowering modern digital coloring can be, I think, in terms of the finished product. And it absolutely can be. I mean, if you look at something like, Jesus Abertov, who does, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of his last name, but it's Spanish. I don't know Spanish. He does a lot of Rob Liefeld stuff. I think he did his Snake Eyes series for ID just recently. And he's done a lot of his Marvel covers over the last couple of years too. But I mean, man, there are times when I've actually looked at a piece and I will actually be able to identify it as an Abertov piece before I can identify it as a Liefeld piece, because it's just so, first of all, it's so painterly, and second of all, it's so heavy, and so much of the lighting, the rendering, the shading, the actual shape of the figures, background, and the sky. I mean, all of that is down to the colorist and what he or she is doing. And I don't know. I like to think of myself as more important than a bass player.
Hey, I love the bass. I played bass.
Okay. I know.
But
I'm looking at the guitars behind you and like trying to identify them. I'm like,
well, I
right,
don't have a bass guitar hanging up behind me,
I
so
can't even see like the pickups or like the number of strings or anything
yeah.
from here. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's been said about letterers, for example, that like if you're a good letterer in comics and you're doing your job well, no one will notice what you're doing. You'll blend into the page. It'll look completely organic and it will draw attention to itself. And I tend to feel the same way about colors. You know, I don't know how much of my stuff you've seen. Like I said, there's a lot of it out there, and there's a lot of it that no one has seen. There's a lot of like small indie stuff. There's a lot of Kickstarter stuff. There's a lot of licensed stuff. There's a lot of image stuff. Like, one of the things that I've always kind of prided myself on is my versatility. I can sort of slide into a book that needs a fill-in, and I can try to approximate the look of the person who's coloring the book before I came aboard to the best of my abilities.
Yeah.
Whether it's, you know, cell shaded, like something, you know, what's it? Sons of Anarchy. I did 10 or 11 issues of that for Boom Studios. Their rates are punishingly low. Again, this is the kind of thing they shouldn't say, but it's,
well, I've heard that from other sources than you, is that they're surprisingly low.
I signed my lease for my current apartment that I've been in for 9 years, almost a decade ago. And when I was working on Sons, coloring one issue for them would not even come close to paying my rent for a month. So it was really low. Like it was probably less than minimum wage, and I was doing like a really simple, like I said, cell shaded approach. And that's a weird thing to talk about too, I guess. But sometimes the style is dictated by how much the pay rate happens.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's all time management. Right.
I kind of have to make it worth my while because, you know, if I could be, you know, flipping hamburgers at Wendy's or something and making the same amount of money that I make coloring a comic, I'm not going to kill myself working on the comic when I don't have to. So,
right.
If there was an original question, I've completely forgotten what it was.
I was
still searching on the base.
Yeah. Well, I've always found, I think historically, like when you look at comic production as it has evolved through the decades since it first, like comics first came to being in like the early 20th century, I think that coloring technology has had the biggest but also the most subtle change in comic book art. Like a lot of people, I don't think they think about it. And because I'm a big fan of a lot of classic comics. You know, I love Golden Age art. You can look at Silver Age artists and, you know, Bronze Age, modern, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing that always strikes me is when you look at the black and white pages of like classic artists. Like I love looking at like, you know, John Byrne's like black and white X-Men pages. Like they're just so full and great looking. And I think that with the technology advancing the way it has for coloring, being able to do it digitally and so easily on a computer, and with it becoming as ubiquitous as it has had a subtle effect in the penciling style of that you see, the penciling and the inking. So you're going to see a lot more artists that don't need to put as much lines on the paper because the colorist will kind of pick up the weight. You know, they'll add shading, they'll add detail, and the
worst thing is, the absolute worst thing, as far as I'm concerned, is when you find an example of like an artist and a colorist who are fighting. Whether it's because the colorist isn't picking up on what the artist is doing in the line art, and it's like, oh, there are clear indications of a light source here, but I'm going to completely ignore them because I feel like doing something.
Oh no.
But like, and just in cases too, I think the more busy an artist's style is, the more inclined I sometimes feel to go simple with the colors, because all the information that's necessary to telling the story is already there on the page, and I just feel like the worst thing to do is to get in the way in a situation like that. And I know I've done it in certain circumstances as well, but it's if left to my own devices, I'll always go simple, I think, when it comes to a color approach. You know, 2 colors is all you need, like a base color and then a highlight color that you can just sort of carve out and bucket. most of the work that I'm most proud of, I guess, falls into that category. The stuff that's really rendered and really kind of sticky and Photoshoppy is the stuff I never quite feel as proprietary about that work. I almost feel like anybody could have done it. Whereas the simpler it is and the more elegant it is and the more thought I actually put into the colors that I'm using, that stuff feels more like me to me. If that doesn't feel too preposterous or
yeah, I get it. Yeah. One thing I remember reading an article, I mean, it's over a decade now, but I think it had to be in the late 2000s. But I remember reading an article, probably on like Comic Book Resources or The Beat or something like that. But it was an interview with somebody, I don't remember who, an editor, but it was somebody at Marvel. And they were talking about the key to the Marvel house style at the time was that they had a unanimous color palette for all their books that they forced all of their colors to follow. And that was sort of like this. Yeah, and it was sort of like the secret to their house style, because you get all these different pencilers and they all kind of have their own style. Of course, they're still going to be in the Marvel house style, but pencilers are going to be able to pick them apart. But it all gets like subconsciously blended together by having essentially the same colors on every book.
Yeah.
And it's something that I've never thought about before until I read that. And I was like, oh, that's why all the Marvel books look the same and all the DC books look so different, because the color palettes are so different. Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the old EC stuff, like the entertaining comics of the 50s, I mean, that was all Marie Severin. I mean, she was doing 100% of those books, which is insane, first of all, because she was hand cutting ruby lith and like, creating dot patterns by hand and like layering them in and sending them off to the print shop, which is insane to me. I don't know how people were doing like that back then. I guess I've been spoiled because we came of age in the the cusp of the digital revolution. It's funny. I do feel I sometimes wish I were just 10 years older so I could have experienced coloring comics like that. Just so I feel like the guys who did that, like the Matt Hollingsworth types, or like the Dave Stewarts, or the Laverne Kanzierski, who's a cool guy. I talked to him at a con once. He was really interesting. I walked up to him and I thought his name, if you've ever seen, I don't know if you're familiar with his stuff. He does P. Craig Russell's work for the most part. Okay. And he does a lot of stuff for Dark Horse as well. His name is spelled Lovern. So for years, I'd never seen the name before. I thought it was pronounced Lovern. Yeah. So I walked up to him and said, I said, "Oh, are you Laverne Kanzierski?" And he goes, "It's actually Laverne." And then I said, "Surely you jest." And he just gave me the dirtiest look I've ever gotten in my life. I mean, guys like that who, had to start out hand cutting ruby lith and then made that jump to the digital. I mean, I kind of envy them because I don't know, I feel like they know what they're doing. Again, maybe this is just imposter syndrome speaking too. Like, sure, yeah. There's nothing more valid or less valid about, their or my color palette of choice just because, of what era we happen to be raised in. But again, I've completely lost the thread of whatever question it was you were asking, and I've just
no worries. It's like I say, it's a casual thing. But I guess this all kind of ties into my basic lack of knowledge when it comes to coloring. And I do think it's something that a lot of people, when they're reading a comic book, they don't really think about the coloring. They don't think about the work, and I don't know. I just find it really interesting because it's just another one of those things where a lot of people will struggle to say why they like or dislike something. They'll just, I just have like an instant reaction to it. And a lot of times it's always the penciler that will get blamed because they're the big name, they're the headliner, as it were.
I think most people are like that when it comes to art. I mean, even those of us who create art, I think we have a mostly intuitive reaction to the stuff that we see. I mean, I don't always think about why I like or don't like a piece of art that I see. Sometimes it hits me the right way or it hits me the wrong way, and then that's it. It's closed. I never thought about comic book coloring in any great detail for a long time. I mean, there are certain jobs I can remember. We're about the same age. I'm 41.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna
few years younger. I'm 38 this year.
But we basically kind of grew up reading the same stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Like Rob on X-Force, Jim on X-Men. Okay.
Yep.
You remember X-Force #8 that was drawn by Mike Mignola? He did the entire like bridging section, fill-in issue, and then Rob did like the interstitial art for it.
Yeah, that's
that was colored by, I think, Brian Buccellato. And that was one of the first coloring jobs I ever remember actually taking note of, because the art was so clean and the colors were so clean and so complementary that I was just like, holy shit, this is, you know, I noticed the coloring as much as I noticed Mignola's art, which is kind of amazing because that was my first exposure to his stuff ever, I think. So that stands out in my mind. You know, I can look at it now and I see that he used a lot of complementaries on that book. There were a lot of like deep shadowy blues, just sort of punctuated by bright oranges and yellows. And that's obviously very splashy and very clean, like I said. And then the other book, the other big one that looms large in my memory for me was, there was a Neil Gaiman book called It's Only the End of the World Again, I think was the name of it.
Okay.
And that was adapted for comics by, I want to say Troy Nixie drew it. Really good artist. I don't know whatever became of that guy. I don't see his name anymore or his work anywhere. But Oni initially serialized that adaptation in their Oni double feature, which was a black and white book. And then they released like a square bound collection of it that they colorized, and it was Matt Hollingsworth that did the color, and he did such a knockout job on this book that was drawn in black and white for black and white.
Okay.
That when it came out when I was 18 or 19, I noticed it right away, and I'm like, God damn! You know, it was the first time I ever wanted to play with Photoshop to actually put color down on my own art. And I think it was maybe a year or two after that that I got my first copy of Photoshop 6 and finally started to play around with that sort of thing. And yeah, but and again, it's most of what I do is just intuiting from the art what it needs to complete it. You know what I mean? Like if I look at a page, usually I know exactly what I'm going to do to it. I'm not seeing the whole thing finished in color, but it's I'll know right away. It's like, oh, that sky has to be a nice medium navy. Or, that big expanse right there needs to be like black with stars kind of a thing, or, or I need to taste a texture in there to make it look a little more realistic if it's a, intricately rendered, realistic looking drawing. So it's a lot of it is just me feeling my way into it. And, in the same, like, and that hasn't changed in the 14 years that I've been doing this. Like, I still get the same feeling when I open a page now. If I'm at all inspired by it, I just go, oh, okay, like I can see where I need to start here, and then the rest of it will tell me what it needs as I work on it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, and as far as color theory goes, I mean, it's really basic. If you've seen a color wheel, I mean, certain colors go well with certain other colors. I mean, red and green are polar opposites, so they always pop when they're positioned next to one another.
Right.
I'm a sucker for like a yellow and magenta scheme. I love like a dawn or a dusk sky that goes from like almost white up to yellow to purple. It's just, I don't know. If you look at my stuff, I think most of the books that I've colored, probably 20% of any given issue or trade that I've done will have that palette somewhere in it. It's not always predominant, but it's there in a panel or two in it, yeah, I don't know. A lot of it's just it's feel, it's atmosphere, it's looking at the art and just trying to be copacetic and trying to figure out what it needs without. And again, like I said about lettering, it's kind of an invisible art form if it's done well. And I think coloring to some degree should be like that too, or at the very least, it should look like one hand created the art. Like most artists are capable of coloring their own work. Either, it just takes too long, or maybe their medium of choice just doesn't translate well to comics because they're using dyes or markers or something that's kind of uploaded.
I think when it comes to making comic books,
I try.
I think it helps to have that second creative input, on making a page. Like there's the obvious just assembly line quality of like, it's just going to be faster to have two people do it. So, or three people if you got an inker. But I mean, you want to talk about a dying art skill, it's inking. But
it's fun too. I'm doing covers for a book coming out from Black Caravan, I think is the imprint. It's another Scout comic.
Okay.
I don't know. You might know this name from, or no, I don't think you will actually. This is he's a mutual connection that Jason Green and I share. So you might know his name, Mark Welser, if you've seen his art or not. He's very, very Lawson influenced. And Walt Simonson influenced as well. But he's very energetic, very, Oh, there you go. You were frozen for like a split second.
Yeah, there was like a little second where we glitched out.
Yeah, you're still frozen, but I've got your audio, so
that's what I got going here. Okay, there it is. I think it caught up.
There we go. It's weird. I had to like touch the screen to unfreeze it. Yeah, so I'm doing the colors for Gods of Brutality for Black Caravan, and it's nice when you get to color stuff because we do it at such a large resolution. When we open up Photoshop, it's like a 600 dots per inch image that we're looking at. So when we zoom all the way, we can really see like every little larger than life detail that the inker has put down. And one of the great things about Mark Welser, the artist on this book, is that he is an inker's inker. Like, he's actually using a toothbrush to create spatter, and he's using dry brush effect, wood, and and you're right, it is a lost art. Like there might be one other project I've worked on in the past 365 days where an inker has actually been inking the shit out of something the way that Mark inks his stuff.
Yeah,
and it's just so much. I don't know. I get such a big charge out of that when I open a piece like that, and I just get to it. And it's neat too because it influences the way that I color it, because I'll reach for brushes that have more texture so that, when I'm coloring a tree, I don't want it to look flat because of all that gorgeous brush that's already in there. I kind of want to complement that as much as possible. So, but yeah, you're right. And it not only is inking a dying art in the sense that I think people are losing sight of how to do it because everything is inked with a deadline, or so it seems. Like a contour line, basically, that looks like it's drawn to hold color. Which as a colorist is interesting. I mean, I like getting work like that and I like working on it, but it's so much more interesting to see a comic that looks organic, that looks like it was actually drawn by a human being with a brush, and just the job of inker too seems to be going away. It seems like almost everybody is drawing digitally nowadays too. So it's like,
I think
they just open up Photoshop or
that's another thing
where they go to it and like no inking to be done. Like it's
with the advancement of the technology, it's just so much. I don't want to necessarily say easier. Obviously, it's easier, but just having, if you have a penciler that does really full pencils. And you just go in Photoshop, darken it up, and then the colorist can go over top that. I mean, I think it wasn't even that recently, but when Joe Mad was doing the Ultimates book, like volume 3 or whatever at Marvel, I think that famously like didn't have an inker. It was just pencils to colors, and frankly, I thought it looked kind of muddy and not crisp.
It looked good.
It didn't look bad, but
sure. And that's a good example too. Like it's one of those things where my least favorite thing to get when I open my email and get a batch of pages is uninked, just penciled pages. It doesn't feel ready for color to me, and it doesn't feel finished. I mean, it looks like production still, And I guess all comic art is production art. I mean, the actual finished artifact is the comic itself, but you know what I mean? Like, when something is inked and like the levels are corrected, and then you open it up and it looks like a finished page, it looks like a finished page. And I mean, there's a difference between that and something that just looks like it's still being worked on.
Right.
It's a pet peeve, I guess. I'm working on a graphic novel right now. The first 60 pages were drawn by the artist using a brush, and they look beautiful. And then the last 40, he switched to open canvas, I think, with Photoshop. I could instantly tell that there was a change. And it's funny too, because like there are little things that no one ever seems to talk about when it comes to digitally drawn comic art. And the biggest thing that I've noticed is crowd scenes often have way too much detail because the artist is zooming in so close.
Right.
That like they're rendering like every single tooth in a character's mouth, and it's like, you know, you don't need to do that. No one's going to see that. It's going to reduce to the size of a postage stamp. Like, you don't really. And oftentimes, to me, like when I actually see pages like that in print, I can immediately tell that they were drawn in Photoshop or some similar program. I don't know. They look busy. They look crowded. The line weight looks bizarre, and I'm just like, man, watch that. Like.
One thing I want to talk about, maybe a final topic before we decide to call it an evening or an afternoon. I mean, we're in different time zones. How do you feel about modern recoloring of older comic books, like classic books? Do you care either way? Do you think there's a market for it?
I'm puzzled by it a lot of the time. Like when I look at something like, I don't know if you've seen current printings of like Saga of the Swamp Thing, the Alan Moore run for DC. Those, I mean, the covers are very artfully done. Most of them are just zoomed in single images of Swamp Thing drawn by Steve Bissett. And they've been overcolored, like I said, in a very sort of sticky, Photoshop-y kind of way that just looks really wrong to me. Especially when you open the book and it's, you know, it hasn't been recolored. It's using the old palette. It's using percentages of like cyan, magenta, and yellow. And it looks very faithful to the way that the comics were printed many, many years ago. And I think, I don't know. My mind, it's like colorizing an old black and white movie for like TNT or something. It just you can do it, and I'm sure there's an audience that probably thinks it looks fantastic, but to my mind, when you're doing a reprint of old work, it should hold to the spirit of the work as much as possible. And I think if you, I don't know, every time I see Jack Kirby computer colored, it looks so wrong and strange to me. It's just like, what the hell were they thinking? Like, why not just go flat, bold primaries? Like,
I have that. I have that
or
same problem.
The big EC.
I have that same problem. Like I'm not personally a fan of recoloring old books, and part of it is it's like I don't have because you can even go like cite specific examples. What was it? Brian Boland did the Batman book with Alan Moore, and he went back and recolored it himself. So you have that kind of George Lucas style of I'm fixing my own art, and so it's like you can't really complain, like, you're ruining the original artist's vision. But I still have this issue where
because it's that artist's vision. The thing about that Boland book that I really hated, he didn't just recolor it. Like, it wasn't like he swapped out poster paints or dyes for Photoshop. He changed the palette pretty dramatically, and whereas it used to be really colorful and really vibrant and really engaging, the whole thing looked like mud to me. Like, it looked like it was done in grayscale almost, and it just I don't know. I feel like comics should be colorful as much as possible.
I agree.
It's a dark story. It's an adult Batman story in as much as a Batman story can be, but
my impression is that
it's just, I don't know. It looked wrong.
I agree. My impression is that it oftentimes it seems like it almost seems like it certainly exemplifies the difference in artistic styles. When, like what I was talking about earlier with when coloring technology was as limited as it was, you would have the penciler and the inker doing a lot of work of really conveying the information of what's on the page so that you can really follow it. And then the color just kind of just there, it's a light touch. And so now you have people that want to go back and recolor it to make the coloring as busy and as dense as modern comic book colors are. But the art isn't as wide open as a lot of modern artists are to make room for that dense coloring. So to me, it just looks really muddy and cluttered, and it just looks, that's part of the whole, like, why it looks wrong to me. And I don't know. I think it's kind of just like a low, I don't want to be too mean, but it's just sort of like a low informed opinion on art. Like, I want all of my comics to look like movies, so they all have to have this, mundane, painterly, color palette. And a friend of mine once said to me, and I've kind of maintained this for a long time, is he said, I like my comic books to look like comic books. And it's such a simple, it's such a simple statement, but like, I totally get it. You know, it makes sense. Like when you think of what a comic book is, like on a philosophical level, you know, just the idea, you know, it looks like a Jack Kirby comic, you know, it looks like an old superhero comic, you know. And so that's why,
when I think of a comic book, I think of like Fantastic Four number 50. Like that's just the image that pops into my mind.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think that muddy palette was sort of at its worst, or certainly at its most prevalent in probably 12 years ago, maybe. It was the same time that every video game looked like Call of Duty 2 and Fallout 3, where it was just like, we've got both colors, brown and gray.
Exactly.
And it's so drab and it's so lazy. And it just, I don't know. Certainly, and again, you know, if you're going for a post-apocalyptic aesthetic or a war aesthetic, it's going to make sense to a degree to want to embrace palettes like that, but there are always opportunities to do interesting things with color, and it's kind of a shame to see people just eschewing those possibilities in favor of something that's just really drab and boring and not all that engaging.
Yeah,
something that doesn't like a comic book, right? Like
like I saw they were recoloring the Inkall, the Mobius book, you know. And it's just like, man, I just don't like it. It doesn't look like Mobius's art. Like, it just doesn't look right.
Who in their right mind thinks that they have what it takes to recolor Mobius? Like, that's insane.
I know.
It's a perfect comic. It looks amazing. It looks exactly like he wanted it to look. I mean, his palette was so consistent and it was so singular. Like, it's one of those things that, you know, if you squint and look at like a Mobius image, like you can usually tell that it's a Mobius image just because of the way it's colored. You know, we're seeing simpler color make a return, I think, in comics. I look at a lot of the stuff that Kaboom does for like young adults and kids. You know, books like Lumberjanes and I think there's a couple of licensed ones that they do as well. But I mean, it's, for the most part, it's very simple, you know, straightforward, not busy, not too rendered color. It's such a nice, simple treatment for books, you know, meant for kids. And I think great to see that sort of thing. And you know, there are even like some more formally experimental books out there. Like, I don't know if you've seen David Mazzucchelli's Asterios Polyp.
Oh yeah, I love that.
He was actually nominated. Yeah, he was nominated for an Eisner and a Harvey, I think, for coloring that book. You know, it was so nice to see because it was so integrated in just the overall presentation of that book.
Right.
It's impossible to divorce the color from the line art and vice versa. Like, it's all of a piece. And so yeah, it cheers me up to see simpler, more straightforward takes, I guess, on comic book color that doesn't look like it's trying to be a movie, I guess. And again, like I said, there's room for that. And certainly I've done plenty of books that sort of fall into that category. But like I said earlier, it's just, that's not the stuff that I feel proprietary about. I just feel like that was a job that I did and they wanted me to do a certain thing a certain way. So I did. And that's what it ended up becoming. But
yeah, I get that. But yeah, I think we might wrap it up there. I try to be mindful of everybody's time. I really appreciate you sitting down with me and chatting.
Ditto. I mean, like I said, I've done like one print interview in 14 years of working in comics, so this will join that, I guess. And, maybe I'll do another one like 10 years from now.
Well, that's one of the things I like about doing this podcast is just kind of getting to chat with people that I know are not you know, making the headlines, but they're still artists and they still got a lot to say. And I don't know if there's a big market for that as far as podcasts go, but I enjoy it. So, you know, that's really all if I can't enjoy it, then I guarantee you I can't do it. You know, it's such a drag for me to try and do anything and maintain like an online presence, you know. Like I would just as soon close all my accounts and just sit at my computer and write, but then, you know, who would ever see it? So
no, exactly. Yeah. It's, you know, I keep saying to a friend who loves doing, it's weird, he does like a lot of like installation type pieces. He actually bought bought a copy, well, two copies actually, of The Naked Lunch, Burroughs, which I've never read, but he loves it, and he decided he was going to do this crazy art note, pulled out every single page of the book, and again, he bought two copies so that he would have the front and the reverse as well. And he cut out every single individual word from that book, mixed them all up in a giant bag, and pasted them onto an enormous canvas that I think measured like 6 feet by 4 feet. And he had offers from people that wanted to buy it. There were people that actually wanted to, display it in coffee shops and so forth. And he always said no. And I'm like, man, art wants an audience. Like, you're going to go to the trouble of making something crazy like that, show it off. And, you don't even have to be proud of it. You can just put it out there in the world and watch how people react to it. And if it's with puzzlement or something, then that's fine too. But yeah.
Well, cool, man. Again, appreciate you doing this. Let's talk again sometime. If you ever got anything you want to try and promote, we might be able to get it in front of 5 new people or something.
Sweet. I'm working on a lot of like crowd-funded graphic novels and stuff that won't be out until the end of the year, but maybe there'll be something that I can actually promote by the time 2021 comes to a close.
Cool. Well, right on, man. Well, yeah, you just let me know. And take care. I guess I didn't say it at any time in the podcast, but this is actually my first international episode because you are Canadian.
Yes, right on the border. If I were to take this phone and walk it over to my door, you would actually be able to see Niagara Falls, New York from my window. But so I'm not very international, but I'm technically.
So you're basically it's like so close to being a New Yorker, Not a New York City.
Everyone should. No. Yeah, upstate New York is
there's a difference. Yeah,
I see. Yeah. I love it when people come to Western New York for the first time. They always seem so disappointed. It's it's like Pennsylvania. It's just
Yeah. Well, all right, man. Take care.
Cool.
We're gonna call it there, and I will be in touch with you in the future about a variety of different things.